The United States Supreme Court has just issued a rare and powerful 9-0 unanimous decision that could have far-reaching effects on how the Fourth Amendment is interpreted, particularly when it comes to the use of excessive force by law enforcement. This ruling is not just a technical legal development. It directly touches on the everyday rights of Americans and could shape how courts handle similar cases for years to come. The case, Barnes v. Felix, centers on the Fourth Amendment, which protects citizens against unreasonable searches and seizures. But here, the issue wasn't just about a traditional search or a warrant. It was about when an encounter between police and a citizen turns into a seizure under the Constitution and how excessive force should be evaluated in that context. While it's not a Second Amendment case in the strictest sense, this ruling is especially important for lawful gun owners. Many will recall highly publicized incidents where legal firearm owners had encounters with police that escalated quickly, sometimes ending with serious injury or death. In oral arguments, the justices even discussed scenarios where officers do not clearly identify themselves, pull a firearm, and a citizen reacts in what they believe is self-defense. This ruling could influence how such situations are viewed under constitutional law. The case background. The events that sparked this case took place in Texas. Officer Roberto Felix pulled over a man named Ashton Barnes after the state's highway toll cameras flagged his vehicle for multiple unpaid tolls. This was a routine traffic stop at first, but it escalated quickly. Felix instructed Barnes to step out of his vehicle. Barnes opened the driver's side door as if he was going to comply, but instead he suddenly tried to drive away. In those few tense moments, Officer Felix reacted instinctively. He stepped onto the vehicle's floorboard area with the door still open, trying to maintain control of the situation. Then, in the space of just a couple of seconds, Felix fired 2 shots at Barnes as the car moved forward. The bullets struck Barnes, fatally wounding him. Despite his injuries, Barnes managed to stop the vehicle and put it in park. The entire sequence, from the moment the door opened to the fatal shots, happened in roughly 5 seconds. In the aftermath of this tragic incident, the parents of Barnes, both his mother and father, filed a lawsuit against the officer. They alleged that the officer had violated Barnes's Fourth Amendment right, specifically his protection against the use of excessive force. When the case was first reviewed in the district court, the judge granted summary judgment in favor of the officer. The court based its decision on what's known in the Fifth Circuit as the moment of threat rule. Under this rule, the question is narrowly focused on whether, at the precise moment when deadly force was used, the officer was in danger. The Court of Appeals later took up the case and ultimately upheld the district court's ruling. Their reasoning followed the same moment of threat principle. They explained that under this approach, events leading up to the use of deadly force are essentially disregarded. In other words, the court does not need to consider the officer's prior actions, the sequence of events, or any contributing circumstances, only whether the officer faced a threat at that exact moment. In this specific case, the court identified that moment of threat as the roughly 2 seconds during which the officer was clinging to the side of a moving car while Barnes was attempting to flee. During those brief seconds, the court determined that Officer Felix could have reasonably believed his life was in immediate danger. Based on that conclusion, the Fifth Circuit panel ruled that the shooting was lawful under their interpretation of the law. Eventually, the case made its way to the United States Supreme Court. The central question before the justices was whether lower courts should continue to apply the Fifth Circuit's narrow moment of threat rule in these types of Fourth Amendment excessive force claims, or whether a broader approach was necessary. The Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision, rejected the Fifth Circuit's limited framework. Instead, the court reaffirmed that claims involving alleged excessive force by law enforcement during a stop or arrest must be evaluated under the Fourth Amendment's requirement of objective reasonableness from the perspective of a reasonable officer on the scene. But importantly, the court emphasized that this determination must consider the totality of the circumstances, not just a single snapshot in time. This means the analysis should take into account all relevant facts and events before, during, and after the incident. By doing so, the courts can develop a complete and fair picture of what actually happened and whether the officer's use of force was truly reasonable. In short, the Supreme Court made it clear that focusing only on the split second when the force was used is not enough. Instead, the context surrounding the entire encounter matters, and it must be factored into any decision about whether a constitutional violation occurred. In essence, the Supreme Court determined that when evaluating cases like this, courts cannot focus solely on the exact moment when a perceived threat occurred. Instead, they must examine the entire chain of events, the totality of the circumstances. This means that the Fifth Circuit and the District Court will now have to consider every relevant factor, the initial reason for the stop, which in this case was tied to toll violations, the way the police officer interacted with Ashton Barnes during that stop, the officer's decision to physically jump onto the vehicle, and everything that happened after that decision. By requiring this broader perspective, the Supreme Court issued a mandate sending the case back to the lower court for a fresh review under this new standard. One unusual element in this situation is that the case is now being reopened at the district court level, and it is being pursued by both the mother and the father of Ashton Barnes. The father, from what I've gathered, is representing himself, acting pro se, and it appears he may currently be serving time in prison. Despite his circumstances, he has been filing arguments on his son's behalf, drawing on the Supreme Court's recent decision as the basis for his claims. This adds an interesting layer to how the case might proceed because the filings and legal strategies could take some unexpected turns. What makes this case especially significant is its potential impact on everyone's Fourth Amendment protections against excessive force. During the Supreme Court's oral arguments, the justices acknowledged that there are many situations in which ordinary citizens, including lawful gun owners, encounter law enforcement officers whose actions might escalate unnecessarily. Sometimes officers fail to clearly identify themselves, misjudge a situation, or react in ways that place people in real danger. Under the court's new guidance, if law enforcement acts improperly in these scenarios, judges now have greater flexibility to weigh all aspects of the incident and, when justified, rule in favor of the citizen rather than the officer. This is a meaningful shift that could affect how similar cases are decided in the future. That's why this ruling is so important. It not only reopens this specific case, but also reinforces constitutional protections for people across the country. The next steps in the lower court will be worth following closely, as they will reveal how this precedent is applied in real-world situations. If you found this breakdown helpful and want to stay updated as this case develops, make sure you subscribe. Your support truly helps keep this information accessible for everyone. Thank you as always for watching and for being part of this community.